All right. We're live. We're good. Awesome. Well, wow. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Big round of applause to you for being here in person in Berkeley. I'm Sarva. I am one of the co-presidents of ISC this past year, and I'm an MBA student here at UC Berkeley. So excited to see you all today. Super excited because this is our first hybrid event. For those of you who are familiar with ISC, we've been completely virtual, and this is the first time we're trying to do it here in person in Berkeley, on Instagram Live, and on Zoom. So we'll see how this is going to go, and by next event, we'll add the metaverse too, and it's going to be just great. So if you don't know ISC, it's Iranian Students of California. It's a nonprofit organization that was started 2 years ago. And last year, we officially became a 501c3 registered here in California under the name Iranian American Student Council. We've been planning programs that benefit students of Iranian heritage here in California. We are non-religious, non-political, nonprofit, and we have members all over California. So it's been really exciting the last 2 years. One of the programs that we started last year was called The Tale of a Success. This is an episode of this amazing event that we've been going for a year now, and we're excited to have Abdi here. This is also, we also have one more episode of this event on July 21st. So tune into Dr. Abbas Ardehali's talk on July 21st. That one will be on Zoom. This event is super cool because it's in collaboration with 4 other organizations. First, we're partnering with 2 student organizations here on UC Berkeley campus. One is ISA, Iranian Students Association of America. Shout out to all the ISA members here. ISA is the Iranian student organization on campus focused on helping graduate students connect, and they plan a lot of amazing events. And this is also an episode of A Little More, which is a series they started, and they have a lot of talks by thought leaders here in the Bay Area. So check out those events. There will be more of those planned by ISA as well. And then the other Berkeley student organization is Net Impact. This is actually my department in the Haas School of Business, and they're also focused on social impact. So thank you to all the Net Impact folks who are here and on the Zoom. But we also have to thank our supporters, 2 amazing nonprofit organizations that are sponsoring this event. One is Persian Center for hosting us here graciously. Thank you, Shaheen, and everyone else for hosting us. Parks Equality Center, which they have been providing financial support for this whole series. So thank you to Parks Equality too. And I think it's just so amazing that we have 5 nonprofit organizations bringing this event together. And with Abdi here, who's been in the nonprofit world, tonight's really a celebration of, nonprofit work, civil engagements, volunteer work. And we thank you all for being here for that. I think nonprofit work is super important, but very undervalued, especially in immigrant communities such as ours. Success has different definitions in our community, and sometimes we forget that the direct impact that you can have on people's lives is just as successful of an action. So thank you to all those who volunteer and do nonprofit work here. Shout out to all of you, pat them on the back if you see them. And let's celebrate nonprofit work today. Just logistically, we'll have the interview with Abdi. There will be a Q&A that Dario will run, and then we will have dinner. And dinner will be served in the room next door. And while people are grabbing dinner, we'll turn this room with tables into a dining area, just like any wedding that you've seen. So that will be good practice for our future business that we're going to run weddings. All right. So enough about me and this event. Let me introduce our host and our special guest. Dario Ismail Shirazi, who's a member of ISC's board, is going to be our interviewer today. Dario just graduated from USC with her bachelor's in intelligence 22, and she moved up to Bay Area to pursue her master's in UCSF in global health. So we're super excited to have Dario up here. And obviously, Abdi is our esteemed guest. Abdi Soltani doesn't need any introduction. He's been the executive director of ACLU of Northern California since 2009. ACLU of Northern California, I believe, is the largest affiliate of ACLU. Is that still true? It's still true. Awesome. So Abdi has been leading this organization for over 10 years. And before that, he's dedicated his life to nonprofit work and civil engagement. I won't spoil it because Dario is going to ask a lot of questions about his history and all the great work that he's done. but just know that he has done amazing work in this area. And I wanted to also mention that he's a fellow of the Levi Strauss Foundation Pioneers in Justice program. And I want to make sure to get that correctly, because I looked it up, and it's a program that picks a few people every 10 years, people who have committed their careers to nonprofit work. So Abdi was selected in 2010, and in 2020, they selected a few more people. So highly selective program. So we're very proud to have, you're probably the only Iranian American on that list. So very proud to have you there. And speaking of that, Abdi has been involved in the Iranian American community too, which is awesome, and Daria will ask him about it. So without further ado, I'll invite both of them to the stage to start the interview. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Can y'all hear me? Okay, perfect. I am very excited that we have Abdi today and all of you guys here tonight. It will be amazing. Without further ado, I know y'all are excited to hear about all the amazing questions that we have tonight. Abdi, would you please tell us a little bit more about your role at the ACLU, what you do, what have you been doing, and just talk a little bit more about your involvement at the organization.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, and for everybody who's here in the room, it's so nice to see you in person. And for everybody who's on one of like the two hybrid options, it's really nice to be with you all. So it's really my pleasure here to be at the Persian Center, and I just want to take a moment and thank the founders and supporters of the Persian Center. This is one of the first cultural organizations of our community, and also to especially thank Parsi Equality Center, where I've been on the advisory board, and they have their headquarters in San Jose and serve our community so well. So I'm just really grateful to all of you. And before I get to answering your question, I just want to say how exciting it is for me to see such a vibrant community of Iranian American students organize on your individual college campuses, and then to have this network that you've built. And I think that that's important for you individually. Obviously, you each make that choice for how to spend your time, but it also creates a network of relationships that will be important to our community as Iranian Americans and to the wider communities that we're a part of. So I just want to thank and commend you all for being organized, which is what we're going to be talking about today, being organized. So to then now get to your question, Daria. So ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union. It was founded in 1920, in the days after World War I, when the United States was in another period of great change and upheaval, and actually also in the wake of the Spanish flu, although it wasn't part of our story of our founding, but we're very much go through cycles of history. At that time, during World War I, there was a committee that was organized to defend the rights of people who objected based on their conscience from going to war. That committee then kept organizing and stayed active, and was founded the ACLU in 1920. And one of the catalysts was there was these large number of immigrants in the United States, especially many from Eastern Europe, who were radicals. They were organizing labor unions, workers, and there were mass deportations of immigrants with no due process. And that also was one of the catalysts of the founding of the ACLU. At that time was also some of the peak of lynchings of African Americans, as well as gross violations of African Americans' rights in this country. So all of these things came together in creating the American Civil Liberties Union in 1920. Quite quickly, the ACLU developed a network of local affiliates that were addressing civil liberties and civil rights issues in their communities. And the ACLU of Northern California was founded in 1934 during the Great Depression, when workers on the waterfront in San Francisco went on strike and were met by violence, both by police, but also by vigilantes that were hired by many of the companies at the time. And it was a grave threat to people's freedom of speech, their freedom of association, to be met with violence when they were exercising those rights. So at the ACLU of Northern California, we work with the whole rest of the ACLU for a very simple mission, which is to defend the rights of every person in the United States under both our rights in the United States Constitution, as well as our nation's and our states' civil rights and other laws that give us a range of rights. My job at the ACLU of Northern California is I'm the executive director. So what that means is that I work with my wonderful team of staff, our terrific board of directors, and then our membership and our activists and our volunteers, as well as cooperating law firms that work with us on the lawsuits that we file. So that's a little bit about ACLU and a little bit about what I do there, and I'm excited about the whole conversation today.
Amazing. I'm so glad to hear that you work with a lot of diverse communities, and I'm sure that you talked about networking and building connections. Looking at your formative years, as you have referred to it in different interviews, you consider your involvement with Californians for Justice as the years after, right after Stanford. You described it as the formative years of your career. And when I was doing a little bit of research, I learned that ACLU back then was the legal partner of Californians for Justice. Just out of curiosity, do you believe that the connections, the networking, the people that you met during the early stages of your career at Californians for Justice played any role or impact to whatever extent in your current involvement and your amazing leadership and organizing at the ACLU of Northern California?
Yeah, there's definitely for me a very direct through line for all the experiences that I've had. Now, that's going to be true for each and every one of us. We all have a through line of our experiences because that's who we are and that's what we carry through our stories. I will say I have a lot of admiration for people who make really big changes in their careers and go from one sector to another sector. I've been much more like working in one main area, which is focused, like you all being together here in California. My focus has been on California, and it's been on different aspects of civil rights. So I haven't had like some of the big career shifts that some of my peers have had, where they've worked in government, they've worked in nonprofits, they've worked in private sector, or who've worked across like huge switches of issues. So maybe at some point when we talk about what do I do next, I don't know yet, but I've been on a very like a pretty consistent through line. It actually started a lot in college. So I'm really excited that you all have begun forming these types of networks when you're students. When I was an undergraduate, I got really, really passionate about environmental justice, the connection between pollution and toxics and air quality with poverty, racial inequality, and gender inequality. And the strategy that I got really excited about was community organizing. So that then made me decide I want to be a community organizer when I graduate college. And my first job out of college was with Californians for Justice, this grassroots, really basic street level community organizing group. And when I say basic, I mean at the not simple, but at the base of community organizing, where you're recruiting volunteers, you're recruiting activists, you're working with youth, adults of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, the base of social movements. And I was really excited about that. I didn't want to get ahead of myself in my career. You know, being someone who had really good educational opportunities, there was a way in which like you can kind of go a little ahead of yourself sometimes, but I wanted to start at the ground level. Door knocking, phone banking, recruiting volunteers, getting people to do precinct walks, getting out the vote. And I love those years of my experience. I met the most inspiring people who really changed my outlook. And I remember I had a high school student volunteer. Her name was Tiffany Hammond. And the San Francisco Chronicle interviewed for her why she was fighting for educational rights and why she was working to defend affirmative action. And she was 16 years old. And she said, I didn't have a single vote. I felt like I had 1,000 votes because she was organizing her community. And I found that to be really inspiring. At Californians for Justice, our strategy was community organizing. Our issues were civil rights issues. And the ACLU was one of our main legal partners. And I got to know the organization. I got to know some of its board members and staff members. So that like about 14 years later, when my job at ACLU opened up and I applied, I wasn't an internal candidate. I had never worked at the ACLU before, but I knew the organization and they knew me. I knew their mission and they knew that I cared for it. So that's how those connections kind of really stayed for me and with me.
Amazing. I am so glad to hear that, because I personally really deeply value community service and giving back to our community. My involvement is mostly in like healthcare and like health policy, but it's just so refreshing and nice to see that there's so many different arrays of like civil rights issues that can be still focused but diverse. And I just loved hearing all of that. Now going down the memory lane, going back to your childhood, I just want to like talk about your parents and how you moved here. I believe that your parents moved to the US on an educational fellowship to pursue higher education here. And I believe that you had the very unique opportunity to be a US born citizen, but also go through the challenges of being an immigrant, moving back to this country, pursuing education. I'll let you talk more about that yourself. But as the executive director of Campaign for College Opportunity, do you believe to any extent your like background and your parents and your childhood played any role in like your involvement and the organizing that you did and like the leadership opportunities that you had? And if so, would you just like talk a little bit more about them?
Sure. So starting with our family's immigration story, every Iranian American community and like many other people in the United States, we have an immigration story that's pretty important to our family stories. I want to just kind of note that this is not a country of only immigrants, right? So we come to a country that has Native people of many thousands of different tribal identities, tribal nations. We also come to a country that has a legacy of forced migration with African people who were brought here with force and violence. And then there are generations of immigrants that have come to this country, and Iranian Americans are one in the many stories of that journey of immigrants to this place. But I will just say, as an Iranian American, it's always really important for me to really encourage our community to develop that awareness of the Native people of the lands that we each live in different parts of California or the country, and also the really long, important struggle of the Black freedom struggle, which we'll talk more about and how it relates to our rights. But so our immigration story was 1973. My mom and dad, they were living in Iran. I have two older brothers. They left them with my grandmother and my aunt because we all lived together in the same house anyway, like a lot of our families do. And they had this opportunity to come to the US for a fellowship, and my mom was pregnant with me at the time. So my mom and dad came, and their idea was that my mom would go back to Iran for me to be born in Iran while my dad would finish the fellowship here. They completely lost track of time. They drove thousands and thousands of miles. I kid you not, like 30,000 miles in 6 months, and I believe them. And then I was born at the end of much of that fellowship in Los Angeles. They were too far in the pregnancy for my mom to go back by that point. So I have a birth certificate from Los Angeles County, and that birth certificate affords me citizenship in the United States under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which has been and is always very much in the news, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more tonight. We immediately went back to Iran, and I grew up in Iran. And then after the Iranian Revolution and the start of the Iran-Iraq War in 1982, we went to France for a year on our way to the United States in different combinations until we were all back together, my immediate family in Boston. So then I had the experience of being an immigrant child, even though I was a US citizen, and I knew some English, but I needed to really learn it. And we were talking about that earlier, where Daria, you had that experience at the beginning of high school. Daria, I should say, since we're not here with our Iranian friends.
Okay.
So that's just a bit of my experience. So education is obviously a really key value that all communities share. and that is a cornerstone of opportunity and access and equality. So when I was at Californians for Justice, we worked a lot on K through 12 education. And then I had an opportunity to go to an organization called the Campaign for College Opportunity, which focused on access to higher education. So earlier when I was in the room and greeting many of you, it was so exciting for me to hear some of the educational paths each of you is taking. Those of you who went to community college, or you're in community college now, and then transferring to get your four-year degrees, or those of you who went straight to four-year schools, that all were public policy decisions that were made decades ago to establish that system of higher education in California that we all are benefiting from. And in the early 2000s, that access was really, really falling apart. And some people who had benefited from higher education in California in the 1960s, from that generation, felt like they owed it to this next generation to carry on that promise of the California access to colleges. And they wanted to renew and re-energize that commitment. And that was where I went to work for 4 years. So for my family, education has always been really important. For my parents, it was really important. And for me, like, my education was made possible by, I went to a private university at Stanford, but I had a Pell Grant. Like, that's public policy. And even the private colleges, even though they're funded through donations from alumni and donors, they're all getting tax deductions. And that also is public policy. And those universities get a lot of research and other public funds. So for me, like, doing my part to renew that opportunity to college for this next generation of students, of which you all are a part, was a really exciting opportunity to be involved with.
Amazing. I'm just in awe of, I love like the timeline that you started with K-12 and then college. It's just so like refreshing and heartwarming that I see all this work, like I'm benefiting from it. I went to community college myself, but like seeing that it was done through policy work and people that actually did like the community work to make it possible for me or the next Daria. It's just so heartwarming that we need to continue on this community work. You mentioned something very exciting for me that you said, as Iranian Americans, if I can quote you exactly, education is very important within our community. As someone who has Persian parents, I can definitely attest to that. I think everyone here can relate to that. And I want to kind of like navigate through a different part of your journey, being the executive director of Parsa community. You've been involved with many diverse communities, which is amazing. I love seeing that, but I do personally believe that being involved like professionally with a community that you have shared cultural values and backgrounds, one of them being that you have to go to college, I don't know. It could bring on really good challenges, which is kind of hard to navigate. Just out of curiosity, when you were involved with the Parsa Community Foundation, did you face any challenges, any unique opportunities? And if so, would you please like talk a little bit more about them, and what unique instances were you facing working with people who were all professionals in different fields, but they all shared that sense of like community and being Iranian Americans or people of Iranian heritage?
So for me, when I graduated from, when I was a student at Stanford at that time, I had some Iranian friends like on campus, and I went to the founding meeting of the Persian Student Association, but I was not one of the organizers. But it was actually a lot of fun because there were the serious like engineering students from Iran, like from like Sharif and like, you know, like these hardcore like as my mom would say, the top, you know, like those serious students. And then there was like those of us who could barely still speak Persian, but it was a great room to be a part of. And I actually remembered like there was to fill out the form, you had to have a person from the group fill out the form and be the authorized representative. So there was this big discussion, who shall be the authorized representative? So it was a fun moment to be a part of. But I grew up in a big network of Iranians in my family And we were in Boston from like 82 to 91. And there were like Iranians like coming like all the time. Like how many times we had to go to the airport to pick up Iranians at the airport. I was like, can they please take public transportation? If we had any entrepreneurial spirit in my family, we would have invented Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. But but of course, like you're never going to charge an Iranian for something. Like everything's like based on hospitality. And the reason I'm bringing that all up is that even though I grew up with a lot of Iranians in my family, in our big extended family and our Iranian family friends, once I went to college, I immersed myself in the Latino community, the Laotian community, African American community, and I was the Iranian in those rooms doing work on civil rights. And I did that for about 13 or 14 years, but I always like kept my pride, obviously, in my culture, but had a big concern about what was happening in US-Iran relations. And then after 9/11, obviously, like what happens with the civil rights of Iranian Americans and other people from the Middle East or from Muslim majority countries. So at that, we're now at like 2008, and this incredible group of Iranian American community leaders had created an organization called Parsa Community Foundation. And the idea was to collect and support philanthropy in the Iranian American community, and then have Iranian Americans be philanthropic in supporting both Iranian as well as general community needs. It was had, I think, 6 founders. They were all really successful in different sectors, from medicine and technology and business. And they were looking for an executive director. And at first, some people reached out to me, and I was like, well, I'm not going to apply to that. Like, I'm not that involved in Iranian American community, and I'm sure they're going to find someone. And then like months passed, and the same job announcement came out, and they're still looking, because like there aren't that many Iranian Americans who've gone into this field of like nonprofits or social justice. And I say this half joking, but it's literally true. At that job, we were working on a gala, and we had exhausted all of the contacts that we had. Do you all know what a phone book is? Okay, so a phone book is this yellow thing. It's this thick, and you would open it to sections. So I flipped it open to the dentist, and I literally started cold calling Iranian American dentists out of the phone book to invite them to come to this gala. My point being is like, there are actually a decent number of Iranian American dentists, but there aren't a lot of Iranian Americans in social justice or foundations. I could literally pick up a phone book, and every like 7th name was an Iranian, and I literally cold called them to invite them to the gala. And actually, we did quite well with the dentists from my cold calling strategy. But Parsa Community Foundation was a really exciting moment for me, because for the first time, I immersed myself as an adult in the Iranian American community. The people who I met there were so inspiring, and were giving back in a lot of different ways, different maybe than my own path, but they were doing that in their own ways. And actually, just fast forward, like I was there only for 1 year, because then the ACLU position opened up in the year that I was there. It was a really difficult decision to leave the Iranian American organization, but this ACLU job for like a person who works on civil rights, like this is just, being the director of the ACLU Northern California is a really exciting opportunity. And when I told them I had this opportunity, the reaction of the board chair, Nushin Hashemi, was just one of excitement for our community and for me. Several years later, I've been at the ACLU. Donald Trump is elected president of the United States. He's promised to enact a Muslim ban of some sort. We took him very seriously, as disastrous as a candidate and then president as he was. We took him seriously. And then when the Muslim ban was his first major executive order, his first major policy, I had a network of Iranian Americans that I had gotten to know through my time at Parsa Community Foundation. And also through that, having been one of the advisory board members of Pars Equality Center. So then I was really fortunate to have forged those relationships before coming to ACLU, so that then I could be of service to our own community at a time when we were the target of those types of government policies.
Wow, it's just so amazing to hear that, because like I remember flashbacks from the Muslim ban too, that we were all protesting, and that was honestly my first time being introduced to the ACLU.
Wow.
I was a high school student back then. But you mentioned something very interesting that, again, if I can quote you exactly, that you didn't want to sign up for that job at Parsa Community Foundation, but you did it, and you met so many inspiring people. And I think that's kind of true about my situation as well. I don't know how I ended up at ISC, but I'm sitting here talking to you. You're absolutely very inspiring, and I actually mean that in no way or sense of Persian Taro. It's literally a pleasure to be here and talking to you. But going back into policy work and advocacy, I personally, I am obsessed with health policy. It's just something that I deeply relate to. But I know that when you have an activist mindset, or if you really want to help out, there are so many arrays of, for lack of better words, things that you really need to help out with, that is just really hard to stay focused and, focus on one area and do it right. So I guess my question for you is that, how were you able to find your niche? You said you focused on California, but I'm pretty sure in your career path, you came across with option 1 and option 2, and you had to choose one of them to focus on it. How did you navigate through that mindset? And do you have any advice or recommendation for young leaders who might be in similar paths as they're choosing to focus on option 1 or option 2 in terms of advocacy and policy?
So I'll just say, as a teenager, I was really interested in environmental issues and human rights issues, and obviously the intersection of those two. And going into college, I majored in biology. And thankfully, I got a job in a lab while I was an undergraduate. And I very quickly realized I love what scientists have discovered, but I don't want to be a scientist. Wow, the patience that you need to be a scientist, the number of experiments you have to do. And they don't tell you this, but most experiments yield no results. Maybe because you didn't mix the solutions correctly, or maybe you didn't measure it properly, or simply because there was nothing statistically significant different between this and the other. So thankfully, I learned that before I went to graduate school in biology or science. And then when I started working at Californians for Justice, I had the distinct pleasure of working with lawyers at ACLU and another organization called Public Advocates. And likewise, I thought at that point that I'd probably be going to law school. But then I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I can work with the lawyers. I can understand enough of what they do and be in relationship with them. So I'll just say, I never went to graduate school, but the experiences that I've had have been incredible learning opportunities. And I also think of myself as a lifelong learner. So for the last several years, I've been doing a lot of my own reading about American history. I create my own curriculum. I choose my own books. I find the footnotes and I pursue what I want to learn. So my main point there would just be for students, as you're thinking through your path, I strongly support you all considering graduate school, but don't do it because you feel like you should. Do it because you want to learn something specific that you want to then apply to what you want to do next. But don't do it out of a sense of obligation or a sense that it'll make you complete. because the experiences you have are going to give you that base. For me, I decided to go down this path, and I've been on that path. But at some point, I would love to work on solutions to the climate crisis or some of the other things that I care a lot about. But at the same time, I also know there are really talented people doing that work, and I don't have to necessarily do that work myself. So my biggest kind of advice to all of you is just pursue the thing that you feel really passionate about, the thing that you care a lot about. Like, and I love that you, Daria, that you're interested in health policy. I mean, through 2 years of this catastrophe of COVID, like the issues of health access, health equity, these are really major issues for our society, and they all go hand in hand. The access to housing, food, education, and the social determinants of health go hand in hand with access to medicine, and also like the cultural competence of our healthcare providers. So I'm just excited to know that that's your passion, because I've never worked in the health field directly. And I'm excited that that's the path that you're going to go down and make those contributions through what is your passion.
Thank you so much. And I just loved you saying that, like, pursuing graduate degrees because you are genuinely like caring about it and you love it, versus just going because I feel like every other Persian cousin is going to get their PhD in whatever they're getting it. That's just a really good reminder, at least for me and for everyone else. Yeah. Now, speaking of health policy and recent events of our country, I personally have felt like the current social issues that are happening in our country, for example, Roe v. Wade, and I think it came out yesterday about the climate change, or today, I'm not sure, about the EPA. It feels like, I don't know, as a young person who cares about so many things, I personally felt very like, I don't know, like I felt like I couldn't help or I couldn't do anything and frustrated, and that is fine. But what would be your advice for young leaders that want to make an impact and do something productive, or something that could, I don't know, make an impact on like the trajectory of our country and like where things are going, if they're not happy with it? Because I feel like you're very qualified to make comments on how to take something very catastrophic like the Muslim ban and turn it into something productive. Of course, like I don't have the manpower of ACLU or the women power of the ACLU, but I just want to hear a little bit about what advice you have for young leaders that want to take some productive actions, given the current things that are happening in our country and in future other things that may come.
Well, I would say, first of all, Daria, you are the woman power of the ACLU. You are the person power of the mission of defending the rights of all people. Each of us is that power. And I love American history, and I'm always interested in like, what are the different periods of it? There is no doubt that the election of Donald Trump, this period of his presidency, the January 6th insurrection, and then the lasting impact of his appointments to the court are a major marker in this next phase of American history, and a dangerous marker and a dangerous period that we're entering. And I don't say that lightly or gratuitously. Before you said how you're like, I'm not taroffing with some of the things you said about me. I'm also not exaggerating with some of the things that I'm thinking about. So the most important thing is that each person has to exercise their power as fully and as sustainably as we can in this next period, which is not a matter of weeks or months, but it's going to be years. I think we're going to have to be exceedingly vigilant, and we have to be participating in our communities. And I think that at the end of it, that's the First Amendment. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution begins with protecting our freedom of religion and belief and our separation of church and state, but those two things are there to give us the space to define our values and our beliefs. And then it goes to the freedom of speech, which is our ability to express ourselves, the freedom of the press to broadcast and communicate more broadly, the right to come together through peaceful assembly, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That arc of the First Amendment is from our beliefs through our collective action to hold our government accountable through peaceful assembly, not through this kind of violent insurrection type of thing that we've seen. So I think we all have to really embrace that and be active in whatever form or way that's going to be. You can do that while you're students, and you can do that in your profession, whatever profession you choose. So I'm an outlier, but every person is an outlier because we each pursue our own path and it's going to be unique to us. So for those of you who are watching this, like, I hope you have like a couple of takeaways, which is one, like, pursue the thing that you're passionate about, where you know you're going to make a difference. And that could be in public health, or it could be in business or anything. But whatever that path is, you have an opportunity to make a difference for civil and human rights. You can do that by volunteering. You can do that by donating. You can serve on boards of directors of nonprofits, which need your skills. You can do that as a citizen if you're a citizen and through your voting. And you can do that by going to protests and demonstrations and things like that. Now, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, obviously this is a huge decision that the Supreme Court has made that's going to have a devastating impact on the lives of real people, and they'll put them in exceedingly difficult situations. And that's our first concern. But it's also, exceedingly bold for the Supreme Court to reverse a precedent of 50 years that's been upheld multiple times. And beyond that, I'm going to go back now to the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. This is at the end of the Civil War, there are 3 amendments to the US Constitution: the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, that says that all persons born here or naturalized are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside, which is how I'm a citizen. And it provides for equal protection and due process for every person. The meaning of the 14th Amendment has to be consistent with the vision of the 14th Amendment. One of the drafters of the 14th Amendment is a congressman, I believe from Illinois, named Jehu Baker, who said that he sees in the 14th Amendment an essential tool for the, quote, protection and future growth of liberty. If anyone thinks that the people who ended slavery in this country, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Charles Sumner in Congress, Thaddeus Stevens in Congress, that they wanted to freeze in time their idea of liberty according to what was known in 1868, they're misreading the principles of that revolution in this country. So we first are concerned about the impacts of real people's lives. We're second concerned about what this means for how the Supreme Court is going to approach other fundamental rights. And for me, I am concerned about us holding on to, embracing, and bringing the real meaning of the 14th Amendment to the front, instead of letting other people define it to use it to freeze us in time. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the question of, is there a right to public education? At the time of the Civil War, was there a big system of public schools? Not yet. But the first thing that the newly emancipated former enslaved people did was to create schools for their children, and had support of the government to do so. So like, that's the vision of education that then Brown versus Board of Education reaffirmed in 1954. So I think there's a lot at stake in this next period. And I would just say, for every Iranian American student in your network on your campuses, we need you to be part of the solution. We need to be working arm in arm with each other as Iranian Americans, but we also need to be working in alliance with communities that are consistently facing the brunt of these inequalities, whether it's the Native American communities, African American communities, other immigrants from South and Central America. And out of those relationships, we also gain protection for our own community. When the Muslim ban happened, weren't we all in awe of all these people of different communities that came to the airports in our defense? And you heard me earlier talk about how many times I had to go to the airport when I was growing up to greet Iranians at the airport. Wow, like all these Americans are showing up now at the airport to greet Iranians at the airport. How cool is that? So by working in alliance, we also protect our own community while we're also protecting the rights of all people.
Wow, amazing. I am so glad that I was kind of hesitant if I do want to ask this question, but I'm really glad that we talked about it. I think there was a lot of important advice and lessons for all of us to take home with us tonight. And to kind of like navigate in that avenue, I do have some questions that could serve as a form of an advice from you, if you want to call it an advice. One of them being that you're absolutely an amazing leader. You have led so many different campaign initiatives and like organizations that we talked about them all throughout tonight. But leadership is a skill. Like public speaking tonight, like I was a little bit nervous, but like my first time that I had a presentation in front of people, I was like 10 times more nervous. So I believe that leadership is a skill that we all develop throughout time. And what would be one of your, I don't know, what would be like one skill that you would tell any young leader that is here tonight who will be the next amazing Abdi Soltani in their career? What would be one skill that you would share with them that would make them a great leader?
Well, I would say just the most important skill that I feel like I use the most consistently is bringing groups of people together to talk through like what's the problem, what's the solution, and then what's the plan to get to that solution. So, I mean, the good thing about that is it's not all on you. And I think that model of like being a leader that can bring people together and create the process by which a group can get through to what it needs to do next is exceedingly important. But within that, like there are times when you really have to show up and you have to be the voice or you have to do your part. And I think you will all know when those moments are, and in those moments, don't hesitate to take that risk or to speak up or to take that action.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And before I open the floor to our public Q&As, if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand and we will go one by one, or if our online audience has questions, let us know. I do have one question for you. What is your favorite Persian food?
So, given my name, Abdi Soltani. I walk into any Persian restaurant and there's the name of my food is named for me already. So I'm gonna have to go with my cello kebab Soltani.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that we might have cello kebab. Okay. Does anyone have any questions, you guys, from the audience? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So my question would be, you said that every individual, like as like Dario or me or anyone in the group or obviously anywhere, we have an impact. How do you define the impact? Because we sitting and just resharing something and just being opinionated about something, that doesn't give us the power to move something around. So how do you define the impactfulness of that?
So one of my favorite Americans from the first revolution is Thomas Paine, who wrote this pamphlet called Common Sense. And he's telling the Americans at the time, stop collecting petitions and putting them on a boat, sending them to the king, because he's not looking at your petitions anymore. Like, it's time to take real action. So I would just say, take meaningful action where you are going to make a difference. And it's a big question, your question. So, but I would really encourage you all to not confuse shares and likes on Instagram and Facebook with that action. Those are good ways to spread the word, but they're not the kinds of actions that we need. From there, I think you will need to choose what's right for you, also for how you want to be involved in social change, and then choose some goals that are doable for you and that you can sustain. And then you'll know whether you're making a difference or not. So I would say absolutely use social media as a way to like communicate and get information, but your actions should be in the real world. Examples would be, like, I would really encourage each of you to know your state assembly member, your state senator, your member of Congress. Your county district attorney is an incredibly important position. These are the people who choose like what crimes to prosecute or who to redirect to rehabilitation or treatment. So there's a lot of different ways to be involved. And I think I would just encourage you to just choose something and stick with it.
Thank you. I guess my question was very broad, but thanks for the answer.
Okay, I'll go. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this because you're one of the first people I see that works in social justice and is Iranian. Because I don't know, I feel like in the Iranian culture, we're not, especially here, we don't like to speak out, whether that may be for inequities, equalities, and we're trying to be more focused within our own groups. During the 60s, Dr. King fought for basic income. And I think one of the biggest problems of our world is this social inequality, especially financial. And I feel like if there's a little bit more kind of broader of that spread of wealth, a lot of these issues that take in other maybe locations can be solved in a way. Do you think that America will come to a point where something like universal basic income would become a reality? I know there are parts of, for example, California districts who are enrolling programs like that, but I'm talking about maybe a governmental action.
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a great question. And I really think it's important to look at economic inequality and economic justice. It is the foundation on which a lot of other inequalities operate, and the relationship of race and economics and gender and economics, they're, pretty integral. I absolutely think we need to pursue bigger solutions on economic equality. And I would say when it comes to universal basic income, we already have one, Social Security. And it is for people at the point of retirement. We also have the structure of disability relief. And those came out of the Great Depression. Now, they were by design, they excluded domestic workers and agricultural workers because of racial inequality. But I think we can definitely work to build out other forms of basic income. It was, I think, one of the exciting policies that came out of the COVID period, going back to like the health issues that were unfolding, was the child tax credits. And unfortunately, those have kind of sunsetted, but I hope those types of policies can come back. And under state, I would also just say in this next period, it's important to be involved at the local and state level, because we can enact new policies locally and at the state level that then become the foundation from which new national policies can develop. And so those are places where you all can have a really big impact too.
Beautiful, thank you. Are there any other questions? Nothing online?
Someone from the Instagram Live is asking, what are some of the current civil rights legal issues that you're working on right now? Like immigration, anything else? Like, do you have a specialization?
So for ACLU, we are working on the full range of civil rights issues, absolutely protecting abortion rights and reproductive rights is going to be, it has been and will continue to be a major issue for us going forward. We're doing a lot of work to defend the rights of lesbian and gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And the attacks that are happening, especially on transgender rights, are really, really cynical and really are targeting a vulnerable community. Voting rights and protecting like democracy and the basic function of democracy is a key priority. And then I would also just name the criminal justice system is a huge focus for the ACLU to reduce the number of people incarcerated, and also just this huge racial inequality in the way the criminal justice system targets people. But I'd encourage people who are interested to go to aclu.org. ACLU works nationwide. And we really do our best to try to cover as many of the issues that are facing our communities.
Thank you. And I think there was one more question that how fulfilled do you feel about making an impact, or did you find yourself meeting any obstacles that forced you to lower your expectations on the changes that you've made?
Wow, what a great question.
Yeah.
Wow. Have we met obstacles? You know, I think the biggest thing is that there are people who are opposed to the things we work on, and they too are organized. They too are trying to exercise power through public policy. And I think the current result of the Supreme Court decision on abortion is an example of that. It's like we have to work to defend people's rights. And I think, for example, on voting rights, it's a really good example where like Donald Trump and his big lie is intended to erode confidence and protection of the right to vote. So I don't think that those things lower my expectations. They invigorate me to do my part with more vigor and more energy towards the goal of protecting everyone's rights.
Amazing. Oh, do you want to go?
So I really appreciate the fact that as a college student you became involved in grassroots organizing. And as a college student myself, I've become very involved in the Berkeley community. For instance, the UC Berkeley is trying to move on People's Park and displace its residents. And they don't have long-term housing options or services. And by criminalizing the space and its residents, there's been a growing stigma around the unhoused community. So I was just wondering what strategies you think would be most effective to get more community members involved in face of the criminalization and stigmas around People's Park and the residents.
So what a great question. And I'm so glad that you're involved at that local level. I think that when we think about the United States, obviously there's a number of states that make the headlines for violating people's rights, like whether it's Texas on attacking the transgender children and their families, or Georgia with voter suppression. But California has its own issues, and the issue of housing and the neglect of the unhoused people and people who are really struggling with housing affordability is, I think, an issue of a magnitude for our state. It doesn't get the same kind of moral condemnation that some of these other rights violations happen in other states because it's a little bit more accepted. It's more normalized. So at ACLU here in Northern California, our racial and economic justice program works very much at that issue of the rights of unhoused people and protecting their rights. I think to see unhoused people as our neighbors and to recognize them as just like everyone else as people deserving of dignity, I think is critical. But it also goes hand in hand right now with this increased fear of crime and like this association of the unhoused also with like this public safety dialogue. And I think that from my perspective, I would just encourage you to do that work of working with unhoused people and having them tell their own stories. But this is a huge public policy failure that we have. Essentially, local communities have been able to perpetuate a form of segregation. And when the segregation was explicitly based on the line of race, we've fought that, but now it's happening based on income and just people not being able to afford to like live in these communities anymore. So I support you and encourage you to do that work. I don't know if I've answered your question in any specific terms, but I'm really, really compelled by this issue of the housing crisis, and it's really critically important.
My question is, I think probably many of the audience here will have a great opportunity in the future to work in high-tech industry and will be given thousands of hundreds of dollars as salary yearly. And when they reach that position, they say, okay, why would I care about the public policy and public benefit? What's your suggestion then, for example, to someone who makes 500,000 grand a year, that what would do good for him or her if this person spends some parts of his time for public benefit or public policy?
Well, first of all, like in case the question wasn't heard, just because of the microphone, the question was, what's the relationship between people who are in technology and some of these civil rights issues? Technology is driving so many public policy issues, and at tech companies, the question of how is the technology designed to protect privacy? How is it designed to protect freedom of speech? How is it designed to protect communities? Those are really essential questions, and we need people in technology companies to be working to solve those issues. Just dealing with abortion itself, these are going to be, just watch this play out. How do people access information about their health in states with abortion bans and that criminalize it? The technology companies have to defend the right of freedom of speech to provide information about how to access abortion in a state like California. That's going to be a major issue. So in technology companies, the people who are the engineers, the people who are the designers, they can be part of the solution for social issues through the technology platforms. And at ACLU of Northern California, we actually have a guide for tech companies on how to bake in civil liberties protections in the platform itself. I think the other thing is, like, all of you, whatever job you have, you need to be a voice for diversity, equity, and inclusion within your companies or your organizations, and the pathways for people from all different communities, especially those that have the least access to resources. So if any of you go into, whether it's tech or finance or anything else, like, be that voice to create paid internships for people from underrepresented communities. And then, then you can also make your own donations through your personal donations that you can support causes and organizations. So those are just a few examples of things that people in technology can do.
Thank you. And I think we have one more question.
We have a few questions
Oh.
here, but I'll at least ask one of them. This is a question from Siamak. How do you interact with someone who disagrees with you on issues like voting for Donald Trump or supporting the overturn of Roe versus Wade?
Well, I deal with that all the time. And, I think that we're kind of losing the art of like just regular disagreement and conflict. And that's okay. Like, there has to be the space for disagreement. There's actually, like, within the ACLU, we disagree about a million things, just even within our organization, but we work together to resolve the question and get to the answer. So I would hope that we can disagree, whether it's inside our organizations and within your Iranian student clubs, as well as in society through civil discourse. And I think that's what is so troubling about the January 6th insurrection. Like, the whole premise of this country in the Constitution is the House of Representatives are elected on 2-year terms, the presidency on 4, the Senate seats on 6. You lose the election, you move on, and you go to the next one. So I think there's ways to disagree, there's ways to advocate, but there's a crossing of that line that's happened with the insurrection and the lie that's been spreading that I think is infecting our public dialogue. So anyway, the way we disagree, I disagree with people. I try to listen, understand their perspective, advocate for your own position as well. But do it through, like the First Amendment says, peaceful assembly, and petition the government for redress of grievances.
Do you guys have more questions?
Maybe this is a general question that's useful for everyone. They ask, does ACLU offer workshops to educate public about community involvement?
We do. And for those of you who are interested in what the ACLU does, whether it's in California or elsewhere in the country, just go to aclu.org and sign up for the email or social media. And we have all kinds of online and in-person workshops to get people involved in defending people's rights. And as we were talking about earlier, we each have a role in that. I think if there's one takeaway that I hope that those of you who've been listening and all in the room is, you don't have to choose the path that I chose. You choose your path. But within that, I would just ask of you to have some part of your time, some part of your life to be part of defending the rights of all people, as well as being connected to your Iranian American community.
Wonderful. I'm so glad I heard that. I was about to ask you for a word of advice, but I think you already gave it to us. That is awesome. And I just want to thank you and everyone here for your time tonight. I really do appreciate every single one of you guys, you as well, for being here, being present, asking questions. They all matter. All questions are good. And I'm really glad that we had this environment tonight to just have a dialogue and talk about important topics. And I hope this continues, whether if it will be people following your journey or getting involved with the ACLU, getting involved with ISC, coming to the Persian Center, whatever it is, whatever realm of practice you want to go. I hope to see all of you guys involved within your community. And I think the plan for tonight is that everybody's going to have chai and shirini in the other room, if I'm not mistaken, and cholo kebab in this room. For now, yeah, I just want to invite all of you guys to have chai, roam around, talk to everyone, and yeah, I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.